Bobby built things his whole life. Houses for strangers. Shelves for neighbors. A cradle for our daughter Megan, the week before she was born. But the last thing he ever built was hidden under his workbench, in a locked oak box I was not meant to find until I needed it. His wedding ring. A blueprint from our first home. And 6 words that made my hands go cold. Only open when she lies to you. 3 days after his funeral. She did. I truly appreciate you being here with me today. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. This narrative includes fictional elements for storytelling purposes, and any similarities to real people or places are unintentional, but the message shared here is meant to be meaningful. I buried Bobby on a Thursday. September in Savannah is not kind. The air sits heavy and wet against your skin, the kind of heat that makes black funeral clothes feel like punishment. We held the service at First Baptist on Bull Street, the same church where we had married 38 years ago. Pastor Crawford stood at the pulpit and spoke about Bobby's hands. Bobby Bancroft built 17 homes for families who had nothing through Habitat for Humanity. He said, never charged a penny, never asked for recognition. He just showed up at 7 in the morning, rain or shine, and built. 200 people filled the pews. I sat in the front row clutching a tissue I did not need. I had not cried yet. Not at Memorial Health when the monitors went flat. Not when I signed the paperwork that turned my husband into a file number. The tears would come. I just did not know when. Megan sat beside me. My daughter had flown in from Charleston the night before in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. She hugged me tight, pressed her cheek against mine, and whispered, "I am so sorry, Mom." But her eyes were already somewhere else. Scanning the room, checking her phone, whispering to her husband Derek behind us. I told myself it was grief. People handle loss differently. After the burial at Bonaventure Cemetery, after the last casserole was dropped off by neighbors, after Megan and Derek drove back to their hotel, I stood alone at 34 Abercorn Lane and felt the wrongness settle in. The house was not empty. Bobby had been hospitalized for 5 weeks. But before, his absence was temporary. Now, it was permanent. And the walls knew it. That night I lay in the dark. And Bobby's last words found me. 6 days before he died, I was holding his hand at Memorial Health. His skin was thin and cool, but the calluses on his palms were still rough from 40 years of sawdust. His heart was failing. The doctors said days. But Bobby looked at me with those steady brown eyes, clear despite the morphine, and squeezed my hand. "Ellie," he said, "when this is over, go to my workshop. You will know what to do." I thought he meant the tools. Donate the table saw to Habitat. Give the wood stock to the church. Bobby was practical, even while dying. But the way he said it, the way his eyes held mine, that was not about table saws. Friday morning I stood at the kitchen window staring at Bobby's workshop. A converted carriage house he had rebuilt from the foundation 38 years ago. New roof. New wiring. Ventilation system he designed himself. His cathedral. I had never gone inside. Not once. It was not a rule. More of an understanding. Bobby needed a space that was his. The way I needed my reading chair by the bay window. 40 years of marriage is built on knowing which doors to leave closed. But Bobby had told me to go. So I went. I was halfway across the backyard when I heard a voice behind me. Eleanor. Ruth Hadaway stood at the fence between our yards. 74, sharp as a box cutter, our neighbor for 26 years. She pulled off a gardening glove, reached into her apron pocket, and held out a brass key, no bigger than my thumbnail. "Bobby gave me this 4 months ago," she said. "Said I would know when you needed it." She pressed it into my palm. "He told me one more thing. He said, 'She is going to come with papers. Do not sign anything. She, not someone. She. Ruth squeezed my hand and walked back to her azaleas without another word. I unlocked the workshop door. The smell hit me first. White oak and linseed oil. Sawdust and machine grease. The scent of Bobby's hands after a long day. The scent I had breathed in every time he held me. I gripped the door frame, and the tears finally came. Not gentle tears. The kind that buckle your knees and steal your breath. When I could see again, I stepped inside. Tools hung on pegboard walls in precise rows, each outlined in black marker. The workbench dominated the center. A massive slab of black walnut Bobby had milled from a tree that fell during Hurricane Matthew. Against the far wall, a half-finished bookshelf for the church library. Oak, with carved detail along the top edge. Bobby had been building it before he got too sick. Then I looked under the workbench. An oak box, about the size of a shoebox, bolted to the underside of the walnut slab. Dark stain, brass hinges, a small keyhole. I used Bobby's own claw hammer to pry the mounting bolts loose. The box was heavier than I expected. Dense, solid, like it held more than its size suggested. The brass key turned smoothly. The lid opened with a faint creak. 3 things inside. Bobby's wedding ring. Gold band worn thin on one side from 38 years of gripping saw handles. I picked it up. Still warm somehow. A folded blueprint, yellowed with age. I opened it carefully. Our first house, 1984. A 3-bedroom ranch on Whitaker Street that Bobby built himself. Nights and weekends, for 11 months. Megan was born in that house, and a sealed envelope. Manila, letter-sized, reinforced with packing tape so thick it looked like Bobby expected someone to try opening it before I did. Across the front, in his steady carpenter's handwriting, 6 words in black marker, only open when she lies to you. She. Not someone. When. Not if. Bobby had known it would happen. Known who? Known it was only a matter of time. I locked the envelope back in the box and sat on Bobby's stool. Ruth's words circled in the sawdust-scented air. She is going to come with papers. Do not sign anything. I did not have to wait long. My phone rang Monday morning at 9:15. 4 days after the funeral. Megan's name on the screen, bright and cheerful against a photo from 3 Christmases ago when she was laughing at something Bobby had said. Mom, hi. How are you holding up? I am managing, I said, which was true enough. Listen, Derek and I were talking last night about some paperwork. Property documents, insurance policies, estate things that need organizing. Derek handles this kind of work for clients all the time, and he thinks we should get everything sorted now before any tax deadlines. She paused. The kind of pause that is rehearsed to sound natural. Can we come by this afternoon? 2 o'clock? She is going to come with papers. Bobby's warning, delivered through Ruth 4 months before he died. I stared out the kitchen window at the workshop. 2 o'clock is fine, Megan. Great. Thanks, Mom. This will be quick. Just some signatures. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Bobby had spent his whole life reading wood grain. He could look at a plank of oak and tell you where the knots would be, where it would split, where it was strong. Apparently, he could read people the same way. They arrived at 2 o'clock, exactly. Megan wore tailored slacks and a silk blouse, Charleston professional. The kind of outfit that costs more than it looks like it should. Her hair was pulled back, earrings I did not recognize. She kissed my cheek at the door, and I smelled perfume that was not the lavender she used to wear. Derek followed her in carrying a leather portfolio the color of dark chocolate. He wore pressed khakis and a blue Oxford, sleeves rolled to the forearms, the uniform of a man who wanted you to think he was relaxed. He shook my hand with both of his. Firm, warm, concerned. Eleanor. How are you doing, really? I am getting by, Derek. Thank you for asking. They sat on the couch in the living room. I took Bobby's chair across from them. Megan set her phone face down on the coffee table. Derek unzipped the portfolio with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times and spread 3 documents across the table in a neat row. Each one clipped with a small binder clip, each one thick with legal language. "So," Derek said, leaning forward, elbows on knees. "I know this feels early, but trust me, it is better to handle estate matters while everything is fresh. Delays cause complications. Tax penalties, probate fees, unnecessary legal expenses." He tapped the first document. 3 items. Very straightforward. He slid the first page toward me. "This transfers partial ownership of the house into a family trust. You still live here, of course. Nothing changes day to day. But this protects the property from probate." I picked up the paper. Dense language, official letterhead from a law firm in Charleston I had never heard of. At the bottom, a signature line with my name typed underneath. "Eleanor Marie Bancroft." "Irrevocable?" I asked, keeping my voice slow. "Uncertain. That is what makes it effective," Derek said smoothly. "Once it is in the trust, the state cannot touch it." Megan nodded beside him. She had a notepad on her lap, pen in hand, like she was taking minutes at a board meeting. Second document. Derek slid the next one across. "Life insurance beneficiary update. Bobby's policy. $380,000. Since Bobby is gone, the policy needs to transfer into the trust. Otherwise, probate takes up to 30%. $380,000. Bobby and I had bought that policy in 1991, back when premiums were cheap, and we were young enough to believe we needed protection from the unthinkable." "And the third?" I asked. "Investment and property portfolio transfer." Derek's voice stayed level, almost casual. Bobby owned 3 rental properties: the duplex on East Broad, the townhouse on Drayton Street, the cottage on Isle of Hope, combined value around $410,000. This authorizes transfer of management into the trust. Simplifies everything. I looked at the signature line on the third document. And that is when I saw it. The signature example printed beside the line, the one showing how to sign, was Bobby's old handwriting. The capital B too rounded. The Bancroft too compressed. Bobby's penmanship had changed in the last 2 years as his hands weakened from the heart condition. His recent signatures were looser, shakier. This sample was from years ago, maybe 2020 or earlier. Someone had scanned an old document and used it as a template. I set the papers down carefully, kept my face blank. Confused old widow, overwhelmed by legal language. "And I need to sign all 3 today?" I asked. "By Friday," Megan said. She spoke for the first time since they sat down. "There is a filing deadline next week. If we miss it, you could owe penalties." There was no deadline. 35 years as a public librarian had taught me many things, including that people who pressure you to sign quickly are usually hoping you will not read carefully. "This is a lot to process," I said slowly. "Bobby always handled the finances. I do not know if I am ready to make these decisions." "That is exactly why you need help, Mom." Megan reached across and squeezed my hand. Her palm was cool and dry. "Dad would want everything handled properly. He would want you protected." There it was. Bobby's name, used like a tool. Then Megan said the words that unlocked everything. Dad already transferred the rental properties last year. He wanted everything consolidated under one structure. "This is just finishing what he started." She said it smoothly. Practiced, like she had rehearsed it in the car on the way over. And it was a lie. Bobby had never transferred anything. Those 3 properties were his retirement plan. Bought one at a time over 20 years with money he earned, building houses and fixing furniture. He had told me 100 times that the rental income would take care of us both when we were too old to work. He would never have given them away. Only open when she lies to you. I looked at my daughter, 42 years old. The baby I had rocked to sleep in the cradle Bobby built. The little girl who used to sit on his lap in the workshop, handing him nails one at a time, giggling when he pretended to hammer his thumb. And I saw a stranger sitting on my couch, lying to my face about her dead father's wishes. "Let me keep these until Friday," I said. "I want to read everything first." Derek's jaw tightened, just a fraction. Megan glanced at him. He gave a small nod. "Friday," Derek said. "But no later. Eleanor. The deadlines are real. Eleanor. 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 Friday. Eleanor. 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 Eleanor." I walked them to the door. Megan hugged me again. Derek shook my hand. As they walked down the driveway toward a black BMW parked at the curb, I noticed Derek pause and glance toward the back of the house, toward the workshop. Just for a second, then they were gone. I closed the door, locked it, walked straight to the workshop, set the 3 documents on Bobby's workbench under the overhead lamp, and picked up the sealed envelope from the oak box. "She lied, Bobby," I said to the empty room. "Just like you said she would." I reached for his box cutter on the pegboard wall. The packing tape was thick. 3 layers, pressed flat, edges sealed so tight. Bobby must have run his thumbnail along every seam. He had expected someone to try opening this before me. I slid his box cutter along the top edge, and the envelope split open like a held breath finally released. 52 pages spilled across the walnut workbench. I spread them out under the overhead lamp. The same lamp Bobby used for detail work on dovetail joints and furniture inlays. Bank statements, property transfer records, photocopied contracts with signatures I recognized and signatures I did not. Email printouts, a small spiral notebook filled with Bobby's handwriting, and at the bottom of the stack, 3 pages of personal stationery folded twice, my name written across the top in the careful penmanship of a man who built things to last. I started with the bank statements. Bobby had highlighted entries in yellow marker. Withdrawals from our joint savings account. Transfers to an entity called Magnolia Ridge Properties, LLC. The amounts were consistent. $8,000, $9,000, $500, $7,800. Always under $10,000. I had worked in a public library for 35 years, and in that time I had helped hundreds of patrons research financial topics. I knew what structuring meant, keeping transactions below the federal reporting threshold so banks would not flag them. 23 transactions over 14 months. I added them up on the back of an envelope with a pencil from Bobby's jar. $410,000. The property records came next. 3 rental properties Bobby had owned outright. The duplex on East Broad Street he had bought in 2003. The townhouse on Drayton Street from 2009. The cottage on Isle of Hope from 2014. Each one purchased with cash he had saved from decades of carpentry work. Each one generating rental income that was supposed to fund our retirement. All 3 had been transferred to Magnolia Ridge Properties, LLC between March and December of 2023. The transfer documents bore Bobby's signature at the bottom, except they were not Bobby's signature. The capital B was too controlled, the flourish on the final T too deliberate. Bobby's handwriting in 2023 had already started to shake. These signatures were steady, smooth, copied from an older source. The same template I had noticed on Derek's documents that afternoon. The email printouts made my stomach drop. Megan's personal email to Derek. Subject lines that read, "Like a business operation. Transfer timeline. Phase 2 schedule. Signature samples. One from October 2023 stopped me cold. Need to accelerate. Dad's cardiologist says the condition is progressing faster than expected. Mom is spending all her time at his appointments. She will not check the accounts. Push the Isle of Hope transfer to this month instead of January. Mom is spending all her time at his appointments. She will not check the accounts. My daughter had watched me care for her dying father and calculated how to use my devotion as cover. Bobby's spiral notebook was dated. The first entry, January 12th, 2024. The last, July 3rd, 2024. 6 months of observations in handwriting that started neat and steady in January and grew shaky by July as his heart failed. January 12th. Tax notice for East Broad came back wrong. Property listed under Magnolia Ridge Properties, LLC. I never authorized this. Called County Assessor. Transfer recorded September 2023. My signature on file. Not my signature. March 8th. Traced Magnolia Ridge. Delaware registration. P.O. Box in Charleston. Megan's zip code. Hired Ray Cortez. Private investigator. To verify. Paid cash. April 19th. Ray confirmed. Magnolia Ridge, LLC. Registered to Derek Hale. All 3 properties transferred. Total value, $410,000. Signatures forged. June 2nd. Told Walter everything. Gave him copies. Walter says, prosecutable. Wire fraud. Identity theft. Elder abuse. My own daughter. July 3rd. The last entry. The handwriting was barely legible, letters trembling across the page. Cannot write much longer. Hands, too weak. Ellie will find this. She is stronger than she knows. God forgive me for not telling her sooner. I closed the notebook and pressed my palm flat against the cover. Bobby had carried this for 6 months, through cardiology appointments that left him gray-faced and breathless. Through nights in the hospital when the machines beeped and his oxygen dropped, and I sat beside him reading aloud from novels because I did not know what else to do. He had known what Megan was doing, and he had said nothing to me, not because he did not trust me, but because he was building a case. The way he built everything. Carefully, precisely, one piece at a time, making sure every joint was tight before moving to the next. I unfolded the 3 pages of personal stationery. Bobby's handwriting, shaky but deliberate. Every word chosen the way he chose lumber. Nothing wasted. Ellie, if you are reading this, it means Megan came with papers and lied to your face. I am sorry. I am sorry I did not tell you while I was alive. I was afraid. Not of Megan. Of what she would do if she knew I had found out. She would have destroyed evidence, claimed I was confused from medication, turned it into my word against hers, and I was running out of words. I found the first forged transfer in January. Tax notice came back with the wrong name on the property. I spent 6 months tracing everything. Hired an investigator. Gave copies to Walter Pemberton. Walter knows what to do. He will introduce you to the right people. Trust him. I built houses my whole life, Ellie. I could frame a wall in 4 hours and make it stand for 100 years. But I could not build a wall strong enough to keep our daughter honest. That is not your fault. And it is not mine. Megan made her choices. Derek pushed her. But she chose to go along. The rental properties are gone. $410,000 transferred to Derek's company. The signatures on the transfer documents are forgeries. A forensic examiner will confirm it. The evidence is all here. Call Walter. Trust him. Trust yourself. You spent 35 years organizing information for people who could not find it themselves. You know how to be thorough. You know how to be patient. And you know the difference between a true story and a lie. I love you. I have given you everything you need to win. Finish the bookshelf I started for the church. Do not let this break you. Bobby, I read the letter 3 times. My vision blurred halfway through the second reading, and I had to set it down and press my fists against my eyes until I could see again. Bobby had carried this alone. Through chemotherapy for a heart condition they hoped to stabilize. Through hospital stays that left him too weak to climb the stairs. Through mornings when he could not hold a coffee cup without both hands. He had been dying and building a fraud case simultaneously. Hiding evidence in his workshop, meeting with investigators and judges while I thought he was resting in his chair. All those evenings I sat reading by the bay window while Bobby disappeared into the workshop. I had thought he was sanding wood, adjusting clamps, losing himself in the simple rhythm of making things. Instead, he had been assembling 52 pages of proof that our daughter was stealing everything we had built together. I gathered the pages, squared the edges the way I used to square library catalog cards, and locked them in the bottom drawer of Bobby's workbench. The drawer was heavy oak, solid brass lock. Bobby had built it himself, like everything else in this room. Then I sat on his stool in the quiet workshop, sawdust still faintly visible in the lamplight, and stared at the unfinished bookshelf against the wall. Bobby had built me a case. Now I had to build the courage to use it. I called Walter Pemberton Tuesday morning from Bobby's workshop. The phone rang twice. Walter Pemberton. Mr. Pemberton. My name is Eleanor Bancroft, Bobby's wife. He told me to call you. A pause. Not surprise. Relief. Eleanor. I have been waiting to hear from you. Clary's Cafe on Abercorn. 9:30 this morning. Clary's was 6 blocks from my house. Checkered tablecloths and ceiling fans spinning since before I was born. Bobby and I used to eat breakfast there on Saturdays before he left for Habitat. Walter was already seated when I arrived. 78, silver-haired, with the posture of a man who spent 40 years behind a bench. A cup of black coffee sat in front of him. No cream, no sugar. Exactly the way Bobby drank his. Bobby came to me in April, Walter said. No small talk. He folded his hands on the table, the way a judge folds his hands before delivering a ruling. Sat, right where you are sitting, told me his daughter and son-in-law were stealing from him. Forged signatures, shell companies, structured transactions. He laid it out like a case brief. Walter looked at me steadily. I have been on the bench for 32 years, Eleanor. Your husband's evidence package was better than most prosecutorial filings I reviewed in my career. He was a carpenter, I said. Not a lawyer. He was a man who built things to last. He built this case the same way. Every joint tight. Walter reached into his jacket and pulled out 2 business cards. I made him a promise. I told him I would make sure you were protected. He slid the cards across the table. Victoria Chen, attorney at law. James Oakley, licensed private investigator. Victoria handles civil litigation, financial fraud, asset recovery. She is the sharpest attorney in Savannah. I sent her Bobby's evidence 2 months ago. She has been preparing. He paused. James Oakley is ex-military. 15 years in financial crimes. He traces money the way your husband traced wood grain. I stared at the 2 cards on the checkered tablecloth. Bobby had not just left me evidence. He had left me a team, assembled while his heart was failing, while I read novels at his bedside thinking the only battle we fought was against his illness. He planned all of this, I said quietly. Foundation first, then framing, then the details. Walter's voice softened. You are the details, Eleanor. The part he could not build himself. We met Victoria Chen at her office on Broughton Street that afternoon. Mid-40s. Dark hair cut sharp at the jaw. Handshake firm and brief. She had already read Bobby's 52 pages. Your husband documented a textbook case of elder financial fraud, Victoria said. Forged signatures on property transfers. Shell company to launder assets. Structured transactions under the reporting threshold. Prosecutable at both state and federal level. What are my options? 2 paths. Civil means I file a lawsuit to void the transfers and recover assets. 6 to 12 months. Criminal means FBI referral. Your daughter and son-in-law face federal charges. Wire fraud. Bank fraud. Identity theft. Prison. Can we do both? Something in Victoria's eyes sharpened. I recommend it. Hit them from both sides. They cannot fight a civil suit and a criminal investigation simultaneously. James Oakley arrived 20 minutes later. Early 50s, broad-shouldered, quiet the way large men sometimes are when they have learned that silence is more useful than noise. He reviewed Bobby's evidence without expression, making notes in a leather journal. Documentation is solid, James said. But I need independent verification. forensic signature analysis, bank subpoenas, LLC tracing. I will send signature samples to Dr. Patricia Alvarez in Atlanta, 25 years experience, federal court testimony. She will give us a confidence percentage. How long? 10 days for signatures. 2 weeks for the full financial trace. Victoria slid her contract across. My retainer is $1,400. Covers initial filing and representation through discovery. James set his beside it. $4,200. Investigation, forensic analysis. Court-ready report. $5,600 total. I wrote 2 checks using the good pen from Bobby's workshop drawer, the one he used for signing contracts with clients. Victoria looked at me. One question, Eleanor. You researched and organized information for 35 years as a librarian. Why hire us? Because I am her mother. In court, everything I say gets filtered through that. A jury sees grief and anger. But if Victoria Chen presents the evidence, and James Oakley traces the money, and Dr. Alvarez confirms the forgery, the jury sees facts. I am the victim. You are the proof. Victoria exchanged a glance with James. Bobby told Walter you would say something like that. He said you were the smartest person he ever knew. I felt the sting behind my eyes. He was the smart one. I am just the one still here. I drove home at 4:30. Spanish Moss caught the last gold light on Abercorn Lane. My phone showed 4 missed calls from Megan. No voicemails. Evenly spaced. Every 45 minutes since noon. Pressure tactics. I did not call back. Instead, I sat in Bobby's workshop and looked at the 3 documents Megan had left on the workbench. Quit claim deed. Insurance beneficiary change. Property portfolio transfer. Each one waiting for my signature. I picked up Bobby's red pencil from the jar on the shelf, the one he used for marking cut lines on lumber, and I began to edit. Every irrevocable, I crossed out and wrote revocable. Every permanent transfer, I changed to conditional. I initialed each change in my current handwriting, neat and precise. The penmanship of a woman who had cataloged 40,000 books by hand. When I finished, the documents looked like they had been cautiously reviewed by a confused widow who did not quite understand what she was signing, which was exactly the point. My phone buzzed on the workbench. Megan. 5th call. Let it ring. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after I had signed the contracts at Victoria's office. Plain white, marked confidential, return address from a forensic laboratory in Atlanta. I carried it to the workshop and opened it under Bobby's lamp. 14 pages. Single-spaced. Dense with technical language I had to read twice to understand. I flipped to the conclusion section on page 3. Dr. Patricia Alvarez had highlighted it in yellow. The 6 signatures attributed to Robert James Bancroft on property transfer documents dated between March and December 2023 are forensic forgeries. Confidence level 99.4%. The forger employed a digital overlay technique, likely traced from documents predating 2020. Pressure distribution, ink composition, and stroke angle are inconsistent with genuine signatures produced by the account holder during the relevant time period. 99.4%. I set the report down and stared at the workbench. Bobby's hands had built this surface from a single walnut slab. Those same hands had signed thousands of documents over 40 years. Contracts with clients, permits for habitat builds, our mortgage, our daughter's birth certificate. And someone had studied those hands carefully enough to copy them. Almost perfectly, but not perfectly enough. I called James Oakley. I received the report. 99.4. I know. Dr. Alvarez called me yesterday. James's voice was even, the calm of a man who had seen this before. I have the financial trace finished too. Can you meet this afternoon? Your place, 2 o'clock. James arrived at 2 carrying a laptop and a folder thick enough to stop a door. He sat up at the kitchen table and opened a spreadsheet that looked like an autopsy of my family's finances. $410,000, he said, pointing at the screen. Tracked every dollar. Started March 2023, when your son-in-law registered Magnolia Ridge Properties LLC in Delaware. Mailing address is a P.O. box in Charleston. His box. I leaned closer. The spreadsheet showed transactions in chronological order, color-coded by account and entity. 3 properties transferred from your husband's name to Magnolia Ridge over 10 months. James traced the flow with his finger. The duplex on East Broad Street, $145,000. The townhouse on Drayton, $155,000. The cottage on Isle of Hope, $110,000. Each transfer authorized by forged signatures on documents filed with the Chatham County Register of Deeds. And from Magnolia Ridge, it gets layered. James scrolled down. Magnolia Ridge transfers ownership to Palmetto Capital Group, another Delaware LLC. Also registered to Derek Hale. Different address, same agent. From Palmetto, the properties are either sold to third parties or refinanced. The cash proceeds land in Derek's personal brokerage account at a firm in Charleston. 3 layers. My son-in-law had built a 3-layer structure to move stolen property through shell companies and into his own pocket. Classic laundering, the kind of thing you read about in news stories and think it could never happen to you. How did nobody catch this? I asked. The transfers were filed individually over 10 months. Different notaries each time. All from the same office in Charleston. Your daughter's firm. James looked at me. Megan is a licensed real estate attorney, Eleanor. She had access to notary services, filing systems, and the legal knowledge to structure this, so it looked routine. My daughter had used her law license to steal from her father. The degree Bobby and I had taken out loans to pay for. The education we had sacrificed vacations and new cars and home repairs to afford. She had turned it into a weapon against us. There is something else. James pulled a separate page from his folder. I traced Derek's personal finances independently. He owes $290,000 to a commercial real estate investment group based in Hilton Head. Bad deals. Leveraged properties that collapsed during the interest rate hikes in 2022. He has been making minimum payments using cash from the property sales. $290,000 in debt. That was the engine behind everything. Not greed exactly. Desperation. Derek had gambled on real estate and lost, and when the losses mounted, he had turned to the only asset pool large enough to cover them. My husband's life work. Is this enough for the FBI? I asked. More than enough. Wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, structuring transactions to avoid federal reporting. Each property transfer crossed state lines through the Delaware LLCs. That makes it federal jurisdiction. I sat back in my chair and looked at the spreadsheet glowing on the laptop screen. 23 transactions. 10 months. $410,000. 3 properties Bobby had bought one at a time over 20 years, with hands that were calloused and cracked and never once idle. James closed the laptop. Victoria filed the asset freeze petition with probate court this morning. It locks everything. The house. The insurance policy. The remaining investment accounts. Nothing moves until a judge says so. When does Megan get notice? Court serves her tomorrow. Tomorrow. By this time tomorrow, my daughter would know that her plan was falling apart. That the confused widow she had tried to manipulate was not confused at all. I walked James to the door. He paused on the porch. Eleanor, Bobby's investigation was exceptional. But what you are doing now, staying calm, building the case, not confronting them, that takes a different kind of strength. Bobby built the foundation, I said. I am just following the blueprint. James nodded and walked to his car. I went back to the kitchen and stood at the counter. The 3 documents Megan had brought still sat on the workbench in the workshop, marked up in Bobby's red pencil. The forensic report sat beside them now. 99.4% certainty that my daughter's husband had forged my husband's name. On the wall above the kitchen table hung a photograph I had framed 20 years ago. Megan at 5 years old, sitting on Bobby's lap in the workshop, both of them laughing. She was holding a small wooden block Bobby had cut for her, and Bobby was pretending it was too heavy to lift, making exaggerated straining faces while she giggled. I was about to destroy my daughter's life with paperwork, just like she had tried to destroy mine. I turned away from the photograph and picked up my phone. No missed calls this time. The silence felt heavier than the ringing. The text came Thursday evening from a number I did not recognize. Mrs. Bancroft. My name is Brenda Holloway. I work at Savannah First Bank. I need to speak with you about your husband's accounts. Can we meet somewhere private? It is important. I stared at the message for a long time. Bobby and I had banked at Savannah First for 30 years. Every paycheck, every rental deposit, every Habitat donation had moved through that building on Drayton Street. I did not know anyone named Brenda Holloway, but Bobby's letter had taught me that the people trying to help you do not always announce themselves in advance. I texted back. Tomorrow morning. The coffee shop on Skidaway Road. 8 o'clock. I chose Skidaway because it was on the other side of town from our neighborhood, from Megan's hotel, from anyone who might recognize either of us. The shop was small, 6 tables, a chalkboard menu, the smell of roasted beans and warm milk. I arrived at 7:45 and sat in the back corner facing the door. Brenda Holloway walked in at 8 sharp. Late 50s, dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail, wearing a gray cardigan over a white blouse. Bank professional on her day off. She carried a manila folder pressed against her chest, the way you carry something you are afraid to let go of. Her eyes scanned the room before she sat down across from me. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. She set the folder on the table between us. "I need you to know that what I am doing right now could cost me my job, but I cannot stay quiet anymore." "What did you find?" "I have been processing your husband's accounts for 6 years. Checking, savings, the rental income deposits. I know his transaction patterns. I know his signature." Brenda opened the folder. Inside were bank statements with yellow highlighter marks, internal emails, handwritten notes on lined paper. 9 months ago, I started seeing withdrawals that did not match his profile. Large, structured amounts, always under 10,000, always transferred to a Delaware entity I had never seen before. "Magnolia Ridge Properties," I said. Brenda's eyes widened slightly. "You already know. My husband left me documentation before he died." She nodded slowly, absorbing this. Then she pulled out a printed email and slid it across. I flagged the transactions immediately. "Send a compliance report to my supervisor, William Tate." This is what he sent back. I read it. "Brenda, close this alert. Mr. Hale is a licensed attorney with valid authorization documents on file. These transfers are standard estate management activity. Do not waste compliance resources on false positives. W. T. Valid authorization documents." I repeated. "The forged power of attorney." I told Tate the signatures looked wrong. "I have processed thousands of Bobby's transactions. I know his handwriting the way I know my own. Those authorizations were not signed by your husband." Brenda's jaw tightened. Tate told me Derek Hale had called him personally. Explained everything. Said I was being overly cautious. The next day I received a written warning in my personnel file for overstepping authority and creating unnecessary client friction. But you kept copies. Every flagged transaction. Every internal email. My original compliance report. Brenda straightened in her chair. I printed them at home on my own printer. I kept them in a locked drawer in my bedroom for 9 months, waiting for someone to come forward. I looked at her across the small table. This woman had risked her career, taken a formal reprimand, and spent 9 months hiding evidence in her bedroom because she believed something was wrong and refused to look away. I needed to understand why. "Can I ask you something personal?" Brenda nodded. "Why?" "You could have let it go." "Most people would have." Brenda looked down at the folder, then back at me. Her eyes were red, but her voice did not waver. My father was scammed by his own brother. I was 22, just starting at the bank. My uncle convinced my father to invest his retirement savings in a real estate partnership. $180,000. Everything he had. The partnership was fake. My uncle took the money and disappeared to Florida. She paused. My father spent his last 15 years in a one-bedroom apartment on the South Side, working part-time as a security guard at 67 because he could not afford to retire. He died in that apartment, alone, watching television in a recliner he bought at a yard sale. The coffee shop was quiet. A barista steamed milk behind the counter. Morning light came through the window and caught the edge of Brenda's folder. I sat in that apartment after his funeral, and I swore I would never look away again. Not when I could do something. Not when the red flags were right in front of me. She pushed the folder toward me. Your husband was a good man, Mrs. Bancroft. Everyone at the bank knew Bobby. He came in every month to deposit the rental checks, always polite. Always asked about my kids. He did not deserve what they did to him. I collected the documents and placed them carefully inside my bag. This helps more than you know, Brenda. I am already working with an attorney and an investigator. This goes straight into their files. Relief washed across her face. Good. Because your son-in-law has been stealing from your family for almost 2 years, and my supervisor helped him hide it. We sat for another moment in the quiet shop. Then Brenda stood, buttoned her cardigan, and extended her hand. Her grip was firm. If you need me to testify, I will. I do not care what it costs me. I drove home with Brenda's folder on the passenger seat. The afternoon sun was low and gold over the marsh grass along the Skidaway Road. I was thinking about Brenda's father in that one-bedroom apartment, alone with a yard sale recliner and the memory of a brother who had stolen everything. I was thinking about Bobby in his workshop, alone with the knowledge that his daughter had done the same. My phone rang as I pulled into the driveway at 34 Abercorn Lane. Not Megan this time. Derek. His name on the screen felt different from Megan's. Colder. I answered, Eleanor. His voice was flat, stripped of the warmth he had performed in my living room. We received a court order this afternoon. Asset freeze. I assume you know something about this. My attorney recommended protective measures. Protective measures. A pause sharp enough to cut glass. You filed a court order accusing us of fraud. You froze every asset in the estate. You are blocking everything we have been trying to do for your benefit. For my benefit, I repeated. This is a misunderstanding, Eleanor. A serious one. I strongly suggest you reconsider before this goes further than either of us wants. I looked out the windshield at Bobby's workshop. The late afternoon light caught the weathered brick, the small window where Bobby used to stand sanding wood while I watched from the kitchen. Good night, Derek, I said. I hung up before he could respond. Then I sat in the car for a full minute, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, watching the light fade on the workshop walls. Bobby had taught me many things in 38 years. How to read a blueprint, how to tell oak from ash by the grain, how to be patient when every nerve in your body is screaming at you to move. Patience wins, he used to say. Let the glue dry before you test the joint. I let it dry. The letter arrived Monday morning. Thick envelope, embossed letterhead, Hargrove and Associates, attorneys, at law, Atlanta, Georgia. I opened it at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Dear Mrs. Bancroft, this firm represents Derek Hale and Megan Bancroft Hale in matters related to estate planning and asset management. We have been made aware of a protective order filed against our clients, alleging financial impropriety in connection with legitimate estate activities undertaken on your behalf. We are deeply concerned about the circumstances surrounding your recent decision-making, including questions regarding your current cognitive capacity to manage complex financial matters during this period of grief and emotional vulnerability. We respectfully request that you withdraw the protective order and engage in good faith mediation. Failure to do so may necessitate legal proceedings to ensure your well-being and protect our client's professional standing. Sincerely, Richard Hargrove, Esquire, Cognitive Capacity. There it was. The next move. Derek could not fight the evidence, so he would fight me. Claim. I was confused, grief-stricken, mentally unfit. File for guardianship. Take legal control of my finances and make the investigation disappear. I called Victoria. Letter from Hargrove and Associates in Atlanta, threatening guardianship. Victoria laughed. Not politely. Actually laughed. They are panicking, Eleanor. Guardianship petitions against a woman who managed a public library for 35 years? Who organized the Chatham County Literacy Program? Who served on the Savannah Historical Society Board for 12 years? No judge in Georgia will buy it. But it tells us something important. What? They know the evidence is bad. This is a distraction. They want you scared enough to back down. Victoria paused. We are not backing down. I am filing the civil complaint this week. 24 pages. Full evidence packet. I hung up and reread the letter. Bobby had predicted this. In his notebook, the entry from June 2nd told Walter everything. Walter says they will attack Ellie's competency if cornered. Prepare for it. Even from the grave, Bobby was 2 steps ahead. 3 nights later, I woke at 2:47 in the morning to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. An alert from the security app James Oakley had installed the week before. 3 cameras. Motion activated. Cloud uploaded. 1 above the front door, 1 in the driveway. 1 inside the workshop mounted behind a toolbox where nobody would think to look. I opened the app with shaking hands. The workshop camera showed a figure moving in the dark. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket and gloves. He was going through the drawers of Bobby's workbench, opening each one methodically, using a small flashlight that cast a narrow beam across the tools and wood stock. Derek. I recognized the way he moved. The same controlled efficiency he brought to everything. No rushing. No noise. Just systematic searching. Drawer by drawer. Shelf by shelf. He spent 11 minutes inside the workshop. I watched every second from my bedroom. Hands gripping the phone so tight the case creaked. He found the 3rd drawer. The one where Bobby's letter had told me to leave a decoy. I had placed a folder there labeled Magnolia Ridge Financial Records, filled with printouts of publicly available LLC registration documents. Nothing incriminating. Nothing useful. But it looked important enough to take. Derek pulled the folder out, opened it under his flashlight, flipped through the pages. Then he tucked it under his arm and left through the side door, pulling it closed behind him. The driveway camera caught him walking to a dark sedan parked 2 houses down. No headlights. He drove away at 2:58. Bobby's letter had included a line I had not fully understood until now. I left a decoy in the 3rd drawer. Something that looks like evidence, but is not. If someone takes it, you will know they are getting desperate. I saved the camera footage to 3 locations. My phone, a USB drive, and the cloud server James had set up. Then I called James at 7 in the morning. Derek broke into the workshop last night. 2:47 a.m. Camera caught everything. He took the decoy folder. James's voice was sharp. Perfect. Breaking and entering plus theft. Even if the folder contained nothing of value, the act of entering your property at night and removing documents is a crime. I will pull the footage and add it to the evidence file. The real evidence is still safe? Safe deposit box at Coastal Georgia Bank. Untouchable. I filed a police report that afternoon. Officer Mendez took notes, photographed the workshop door where the lock had been picked, and gave me an incident number. I did not mention the federal case or the hidden cameras. Local police could not help me with what was coming. This needed FBI jurisdiction. 4 days after the break-in, Megan came to the house alone. No Derek. She was carrying a single document, and her hands were unsteady. Mom, I need you to look at this. She sat at the kitchen table and slid the paper across. A durable power of attorney dated October 3rd, granting Megan full authority over my financial accounts. My signature at the bottom. A notary seal from a Charleston office. We signed this together in October, Megan said. Remember? You were having a rough day. Grief fog. I had it notarized to make everything legal. October 3rd. I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar. October 1st through 4th. I had been in Atlanta visiting my college roommate Dorothy. 4 days. I had bus tickets, text messages confirming my arrival, photographs of Dorothy and me at the Botanical Garden on the 3rd. I was in Atlanta on October 3rd, I said quietly. Megan did not blink. No, Mom. That was the week before. You are misremembering. We signed this in your living room. I looked at my daughter. She was sitting in the same chair where Bobby used to eat breakfast, lying to me about a document she had forged, insisting that my memory was failing when she knew perfectly well I had been 200 miles away. It was not anger I felt. It was something colder. Clarity. I photographed the document with my phone. Front and back. Close-up of the signature and notary seal. I need to verify this with my attorney, I said. Megan's face tightened. Mom, you are making this so much harder than it needs to be. Then it should not take long to clear up. She stood, collected her purse, walked to the front door, then turned back. Mom, if you do not drop this, you will lose everything. We are trying to protect you. I stayed seated at Bobby's kitchen table. Protect me from what, Megan? She stared at me. I stared back. 38 years of marriage to a carpenter had taught me that the strongest joints are the ones that do not give under pressure. Megan left without answering. I listened to her car pull out of the driveway, then sat in the silence and let it settle around me like sawdust after the saw stopped spinning. It was the weight that bothered me. 3 days after Megan left with no answer to my question, I sat in the workshop late at night holding the oak box, turning it over in my hands, running my fingers along the grain the way Bobby used to when inspecting lumber for hidden flaws. The box was empty now. Ring, blueprint, envelope, all locked away. But it still felt heavy. Not the honest weight of solid oak. Something else. The bottom was too thick for the depth of the interior. Bobby was the finest carpenter in Savannah. He could build a drawer with a tolerance of 1/32 of an inch. And he could build a secret compartment that even another craftsman would miss. I remembered our first year of marriage. Bobby had shown me an antique jewelry box he was restoring. 18th century. English walnut. He pressed a spot along the interior seam and a panel clicked sideways, revealing a shallow hidden space. False bottoms, he had said, grinning like a boy with a magic trick. Old craftsmen used them to hide valuables. The trick is making the compartment part of the structure itself. I turned the box upside down under the lamp. Pressed along the edges. Nothing. Tried the corners. Nothing. Then I pressed the center of the bottom panel, directly over the spot where the brass clasp sat on the top side. A click. Faint. Precise. The panel shifted a 1/4 inch. I slid it free, revealing a compartment no deeper than an inch, carved into the thickness of the oak itself. Inside, wrapped in a piece of Bobby's red flannel habitat shirt, a USB drive, a sticky note in his handwriting. Press play. I carried the drive to the kitchen laptop. 2 files. Audio and video. I opened the audio first. Static. Then Bobby's voice. Weaker than I remembered. Words spaced by pauses where he gathered breath, but unmistakable. This is Bobby Bancroft. Today is May 15th, 2024. I am recording this in my workshop because I am dying and someone needs to hear the truth. He walked me through everything. The forged transfer he found in January. The investigator he hired. The copies he gave Walter. Then the trap he set on May 15th. Megan called that morning. Said she and Derek needed to discuss finances. I told them to come at 2 while you were at Tuesday book club. Then I hid a recording device inside the birdhouse clock on the mantel, the one your mother gave us. The birdhouse clock. Hand-painted cardinals. Bought at a craft fair in the Blue Ridge Mountains 30 years ago. Bobby had turned my mother's clock into surveillance equipment. The recording shifted. Megan's voice. Distant, but unmistakable. Dad is getting worse. His ejection fraction dropped to 22%. We need to move faster on the remaining assets. Derek. Calmer. The life insurance is the priority. $380,000. If we get Eleanor to sign a beneficiary change, the payout goes into the trust. What if she asks questions? I explain it slowly. Tax efficiency, estate optimization. She is a librarian, not an accountant. She will sign, and if she does not, then we file for guardianship. I have already spoken with Hargrove. Durable power of attorney, competency evaluation. 6 months, and I control everything. I opened the video file. Security camera footage dated March 22nd, 2023. Megan's kitchen in Charleston. Derek sat at the island, with documents spread before him. He picked up a pen and began writing slowly. Studying something on his phone, propped against a fruit bowl. He was signing Bobby's name. Stroke by stroke. Robert James Bancroft. And Megan stood beside him, leaning over his shoulder, reading each letter aloud. R-O-B-E-R-T. Space. J-A-M-E-S. Space. B-A-N-C-R-O-F-T. I watched my daughter spell her father's name while her husband forged it onto documents that would steal everything Bobby had spent 40 years building. The kitchen in the video was bright and modern, marble countertops. Stainless steel, the kind of kitchen Bobby could have built with his hands, but never wanted for himself. Bobby's voice returned at the end of the audio. Weaker now. Breathing labored between sentences. I got the video from Megan's security camera. Wi-Fi system. I learned how cloud storage worked when I installed cameras for a Habitat family. A volunteer named Marcus showed me. I logged into Megan's system using the default password she never changed. A pause. A long breath. Ellie. I built houses for strangers my whole life. 17 for Habitat alone. I could frame a wall in 4 hours and make it stand for a century. But I could not build a wall strong enough to keep our daughter honest. That was not my failure, and it was not yours. She chose this. Another pause. I could hear the clock ticking in the background of the recording. Our kitchen clock. The one with the cardinals. Finish the bookshelf I started for the church. Do not let this break you. I love you. The recording ended. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of that same birdhouse clock on the mantel 3 feet from where I sat. Bobby had recorded his last words in the workshop. I was hearing them in the kitchen. 2 rooms in the same house, separated by a wall he had built himself, connected by the voice of a man who was no longer here to walk between them. I sat at the table until gray light crept through the window. Then I copied the files to 3 USB drives, uploaded them to the cloud server James had set up, and emailed 1 copy to Victoria and 1 to James. I walked back to the workshop and placed the original drive inside the oak box. Slid the false bottom closed. It clicked into place. Invisible. Seamless. The way Bobby built everything. I looked at the unfinished bookshelf against the wall. The oak was smooth where he had sanded it. Rough where he had not. The boundary between his work and mine. I will finish it, Bobby, I said to the quiet room. All of it. If you are still here with me, comment and tell me honestly. If you were in my place, would you confront your own child right now, or stay silent and wait for the perfect moment? And just a quick note. Some parts of the next segment are adapted for storytelling purposes. If this is not something you would like to keep listening to, feel free to stop here. but the message ahead may stay with you. Megan came on a Sunday morning. No phone call. No warning. I heard her key in the front door at 8:15. I had not remembered giving her a key, and the realization that she had one without my knowledge sat in my chest like a stone. She walked into the kitchen where I was sitting with coffee. Her face was rigid, jaw clenched, dark circles under her eyes. She was holding the court's asset freeze order in one hand and a crumpled copy of Victoria's cease and desist letter in the other. She threw both on the table hard enough to rattle my cup. "What did you do, Mom?" I stayed seated. Took a sip of coffee. It had gone cold, but I did not care. I needed the pause. Needed Megan to see that her anger was not going to move me from this chair. "Sit down, Megan." "I do not want to sit down. I want to know why you filed a court order accusing me and Derek of fraud. Why you froze everything. Why you are trying to destroy what we have been building for your benefit." "My benefit," I said. "Yes." She slammed her palm on the table. "Derek and I have spent months organizing your finances, making sure everything is structured so you do not lose the house to probate, so the tax burden does not eat you alive. And this is what you do? You hire lawyers? You freeze assets?" I set down my coffee and slid a manila folder across the table. Dr. Alvarez's forensic report. 14 pages. "Read page 3. I said. Megan stared at the folder. She did not touch it. "It is a forensic analysis of the signatures on the property transfer documents. The ones that moved 3 rental properties worth $410,000 into Magnolia Ridge Properties, LLC. I kept my voice level, the same tone I had used for 35 years when explaining the Dewey Decimal System to confused patrons. Patient. Clear. Unshakable. The examiner says the signatures are forgeries. 99.4% confidence." Megan's hand dropped from the table to her side. "I know about Magnolia Ridge," I continued. "I know about Palmetto Capital Group. I know about the $410,000. I know about the structured transactions under $10,000 to avoid federal reporting. And I know your father found out 6 months before he died." The color drained from Megan's face. Not gradually. All at once. Like someone had pulled a plug. "Dad told you?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "He left me everything I needed." Silence. The birdhouse clock ticked on the mantel. The same clock Bobby had used to hide his recording device. Megan was standing 3 feet from it and had no idea. She shifted. I watched her calculate. The way she had always calculated. Even as a child. When she broke the neighbor's window at 11, she had 3 explanations ready before I finished asking the question. She was doing it now. Running through options, testing angles, looking for the exit. "Mom, listen to me." Her voice changed. Softer. The voice she used when she wanted something. "Derek pressured me into this. He was in debt. Bad investments. He said it would be temporary. That he would pay everything back. I did not want to do it, but he made me feel like I had no choice. Do not blame Derek. But he was the one who—" I watched the video, Megan. She stopped mid-sentence. Her mouth stayed open for a half second before she closed it. "Your father accessed your home security camera. The Wi-Fi system you never changed the password on. He downloaded footage from March 22nd, 2023. I held her gaze. You stood next to Derek at your kitchen island and spelled your father's name letter by letter while Derek forged it onto transfer documents. Robert James Bancroft. Megan sat down. Not by choice. Her legs folded and the chair caught her. She put her face in her hands and stayed there. I could see her shoulders shaking, but I could not tell if she was crying or just trying to breathe. I looked at my daughter. 42 years old. The girl who used to hand Bobby nails in the workshop, one at a time, giggling when he pretended to hammer his thumb. The teenager who cried on my shoulder the night her first boyfriend broke up with her. The woman who had walked across a stage in a cap and gown while Bobby and I clapped until our palms burned. And the person who had stood in her kitchen and spelled her dying father's name so her husband could forge it. I loved both of them. The daughter I had raised, and the stranger sitting at my table. But only one of them had been real. Megan lifted her head. Her eyes were dry. Whatever had been shaking her shoulders, it was not tears. "If you go through with this," she said, "you will never see me again." "I know. I mean it, Mom. You will lose your daughter." "I lost my daughter the day she spelled her father's name for a forger." Megan flinched. It was small, barely visible, but I saw it. A crack in the wall she had built between herself and the truth. She stood, picked up her purse from the counter, walked to the front door without looking back. I heard it close, not a slam. Worse, a quiet click. The sound of someone leaving with the certainty that they are not coming back. I sat at the kitchen table in the house Bobby built. The coffee cup had left a ring on the wood. I rubbed it with my thumb, but it had already stained. Some marks you cannot sand away no matter how patient you are. Derek's phone number appeared on my screen 20 minutes later. I did not answer. Then Megan's. Then Derek's again. 3 calls in 12 minutes, like a pulse getting faster. I turned the phone face down and walked to the workshop. Bobby's tools hung on the pegboard wall, each one outlined in black marker. The claw hammer he had used to build 17 houses. The hand plane he had run across 10,000 boards. The red pencil I had used to edit Megan's documents. I picked up the pencil and held it. The wood was warm from sitting in the afternoon sun that came through the workshop window. Bobby had sharpened it with a pocket knife. The point was still perfect. I had just told the truth to my only child. And the house had never felt this empty. 2 weeks passed between the morning Megan walked out of my kitchen and the morning my phone rang at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday. I spent those weeks in a strange, suspended place. Not moving forward, not standing still. Somewhere in between, like a board clamped to a bench waiting for the glue to set. Victoria had forwarded all evidence to the FBI's white-collar crime division the day after the confrontation. Special Agent Diana Reeves had called me once to confirm receipt and ask a few questions. Her voice was professional, efficient, the kind of calm that comes from years of building cases against people who thought they were smarter than the system. "Your husband's documentation is exceptional, Mrs. Bancroft," she had said. "Combined with the forensic analysis, the financial trace, and the video evidence, we have more than enough for federal warrants. I will be in touch." Then silence. 2 weeks of it. I did not call Megan. She did not call me. The house at 34 Abercorn Lane held its breath. I spent most of those days in the workshop, not building anything, just sitting on Bobby's stool, surrounded by his tools and the scent of oak and linseed oil, staring at the unfinished bookshelf against the far wall. Some mornings Ruth came by with coffee and sat with me on the workshop steps without saying a word. She understood that silence was sometimes the only honest language left. Then, Wednesday morning, 7 o'clock. The phone on my workbench. "Mrs. Bancroft. This is Diana Reeves, FBI. We have the warrants. We are moving today." I sat down on Bobby's stool. My legs had decided before my brain caught up. "6 agents at your son-in-law's office in Charleston," Diana continued. 4 at your daughter's residence. Simultaneous execution. I wanted you to hear it from me first. Thank you. Stay away from Charleston today. Do not contact your daughter or son-in-law. This is a federal investigation now. I hung up and sat in the workshop listening to the blood move through my ears. Somewhere across the state, FBI agents were pulling on jackets and checking warrants and driving toward my daughter's life with the authority to take it apart. I thought about Megan waking up this morning. Probably in her Charleston kitchen with the marble countertops and the stainless steel appliances. The same kitchen where the security camera had recorded Derek forging Bobby's name while she spelled it aloud. She would be drinking coffee, checking email, maybe thinking about me, maybe not. She had no idea what was coming. Diana called back at 9:47. We are executing now. 8 agents at Hale Real Estate Associates on King Street. Your son-in-law was at his desk when we walked in. 4 agents at your daughter's home on Lagar Street. She was in the kitchen. How did they react? Mr. Hale asked to call his attorney. Standard. Your daughter. Diana paused. She keeps saying, "My mother did this." Over and over. My mother did this. Not, I did not do it. Not, there has been a mistake. My mother did this. Even now, even with federal agents in her kitchen, Megan's first instinct was to assign blame. We are seizing computers, financial records, phones, everything, Diana continued. Forensic accountants are on site. Your daughter's law firm notary records are being subpoenaed. This is going to take most of the day. I thanked her and hung up. The workshop was quiet. Morning light came through the small window and caught the sawdust floating in the air. Tiny particles suspended in golden, like the whole room was holding something precious in place. Ruth appeared at the workshop door around noon. She did not knock, just stood there with a plate of sandwiches and a look on her face that said she already knew. It is on the news, she said. Charleston attorney arrested in elder fraud scheme. They used Derek's professional headshot from his website. I did not want to see it. I did not want to see my daughter's name on a screen next to words like arrested and fraud and federal agents. I had spent 42 years building a family. Bobby had spent 38 years building a home. And now strangers with cameras were standing outside my daughter's house describing how it all fell apart. Ruth set the sandwiches on the workbench. Eat something, Eleanor. You look like you have not slept since Sunday. She was right. I had not. The phone has been ringing, Ruth said. I can hear it from my yard. Reporters, probably. Let it ring. Ruth nodded. She looked at the unfinished bookshelf against the wall, then back at me. Bobby would want you to eat. And he would want you to finish that shelf. She left without waiting for a response. Ruth had been married for 41 years before her husband passed. She understood the language of grief. She knew when to speak and when to leave a plate of sandwiches and walk away. I ate half a sandwich standing at the workbench. Turkey and Swiss on wheat. Ruth's recipe. The kind of simple meal that keeps a body going when the mind has checked out. Then I looked at the bookshelf. Bobby had completed the frame and 2 of the 5 shelves. The oak was beautiful. Quarter sawn, tight grain. The kind of wood he reserved for pieces that mattered. The carved detail along the top edge was intricate. Leaves and acorns. Bobby had drawn the pattern from a photograph of the original church pews at First Baptist, installed in 1873. The remaining 3 shelves were rough cut, stacked against the wall. Bobby had measured and marked them with his red pencil before he got too sick to continue. The cut lines were still there, faint red marks on pale oak, a map he had drawn for whoever would finish what he started. I picked up Bobby's handplane from the pegboard wall. It was a Stanley No. 4, made in 1958. The blade so sharp, Bobby used to say it could split a thought in half. I had never used a handplane in my life. I had watched Bobby use one 1,000 times through the kitchen window, the long, steady strokes that sent thin curls of wood spiraling to the floor. It had always looked effortless, like the wood wanted to be smooth and Bobby was just helping it along. I set the first rough shelf on the workbench, positioned the plane at the far edge, drew it toward me the way I had watched Bobby do. The blade caught and stuttered. The stroke was uneven. A chunk of oak tore away instead of curling. I repositioned. Tried again. Smoother this time. Not good, but smoother. A thin curl of wood fell to the floor and landed beside my shoe. I tried again. And again. Each stroke a little more certain than the last. The oak began to give under the blade, not fighting me exactly, but testing me. The way new things test you before they decide to cooperate. By the time the afternoon light went amber through the workshop window, I had planed one shelf to something approaching flat. My shoulders ached. My palms were red and raw in places Bobby's hands had been calloused. but the wood was smooth under my fingers when I ran them along the surface. Bobby had told me to finish the bookshelf. Diana Reeves had told me the FBI was dismantling my daughter's life, and I was standing in my dead husband's workshop learning to use a hand plane because I did not know what else to do with my hands. Bobby had built 17 houses for strangers. He had built this workshop, this workbench, this bookshelf. And now the last thing he was building was me. The federal courthouse in downtown Savannah sat on Wright Square, 3 blocks from the river. I had driven past it 1,000 times in 40 years, and never once imagined I would walk through its doors as a witness. On the morning of February 3rd, 2025, I parked Bobby's truck in the garage on Drayton Street, paid the attendant $4, and sat in the cab for 11 minutes before my legs would move. Ruth was waiting on the sidewalk. She wore a navy dress I had never seen, and shoes that made her wince with every step. She hooked her arm through mine and said nothing. That was the kindest thing anyone could have done. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Room 4B held 14 rows of wooden benches, a raised platform for Judge Catherine Harlow, and 2 long tables separated by an aisle, barely wide enough for a wheelchair. The fluorescent lights hummed a low note that reminded me of the ballast in Bobby's workshop. Victoria Chen sat behind Assistant United States Attorney Nathan Price at the prosecution's table. She wore a charcoal suit and reading glasses, flipping through a binder so thick it bent the rings. James Oakley sat beside her with a leather satchel containing 3 copies of the forensic report and the financial trace. I had seen those documents so many times I could recite the numbers in my sleep. $410,000. 3 properties. 2 shell companies. 1 family torn apart. I sat in the second row behind the rail. Ruth to my right. Pastor Crawford to my left. He had offered to come without being asked. I needed someone who understood silence. The defense table was 12 feet away. Derek sat in a dark blue suit, his hair cut shorter than I had ever seen it. He stared at the table. His attorney, Philip Garner from a Charleston firm, arranged yellow legal pads in a row like bricks. Megan sat beside Derek wearing a cream blouse and her grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones Bobby's mother gave her at graduation. That detail cut me in a way I did not anticipate. I looked at the ceiling and counted tiles. 42. Judge Harlow entered at 9:07. Silver-streaked hair in a low knot. She read the case number, United States versus Derek Allen Hale and Megan Eloise Hale, née Bancroft, and listed the charges. Wire fraud, 4 counts. Bank fraud, 3 counts. Identity theft, 2 counts. Conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation, 1 count. 10 counts total. Maximum combined sentence, 65 years. I wrote the number in my notebook. Bobby would have written it in red pencil on a 2x4 and leaned it against the wall. Nathan Price stood for his opening statement. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with a calm voice and no gestures. He told the jury of 8 women and 4 men that the evidence would show a daughter and her husband systematically stripped a dying man of his assets over 14 months. He described the 3 properties on East Broad, Drayton, and Isle of Hope. He named the shell companies, Magnolia Ridge Properties and Palmetto Capital Group, both registered in Delaware. He explained that the forged signatures had been identified by Dr. Patricia Alvarez at a confidence level of 99.4%. He mentioned the audio recording and the video, but did not play them. He said the jury would hear Bobby's own voice and see Derek's hand writing a name that did not belong to him. His statement lasted 19 minutes. He ended by projecting a photograph of Bobby's workshop, the oak box on the workbench, the unfinished bookshelf against the wall. He said, Robert Bancroft was a carpenter. He built things. The defendants took them apart. Philip Garner's opening lasted 11 minutes. He argued Bobby had given verbal consent. The signatures were genuine. Dr. Alvarez's methodology was flawed, and the shell companies were standard estate planning vehicles. He called the audio inadmissible hearsay and the video ambiguous. Judge Harlow called a 15-minute recess. I stood near a hallway window overlooking Wright Square. The oak trees were bare. Ruth brought me water and said, "You are doing fine." I said, "I have not done anything yet." She said, "Standing in that room is doing something." When we returned, Price called James Oakley to the stand. James stated his credentials: 21 years in military financial crimes investigation, consultant to 16 federal fraud cases. He projected a chart on the screen. Arrows connecting accounts, dates in red, dollar amounts in bold. The jury leaned forward. James traced the first transfer, March 14, 2023. $45,000 from our joint savings at Savannah First Bank to Magnolia Ridge Properties. He placed Bobby's known signature from a 2022 tax filing beside the forged one. Even from the second row, I could see the difference. The loops on the B were wrong. The tail of the T drifted left instead of right. Bobby signed his name the same way for 50 years. Whoever wrote that name did not know where the pen was supposed to pause. At 4:17, Judge Harlow adjourned. James would continue tomorrow. I stayed in my seat while the courtroom emptied. Ruth waited. Pastor Crawford waited. I stared at the blank screen where the chart had been. Bobby had drawn a version of that same chart in his notebook, sitting at his workbench, probably in pain. Probably at night, when I thought he was just building shelves. Ruth drove me home because my hands were shaking. She said, "Tomorrow will be harder." I said, "I know." She said, "The video." I nodded. I went into the workshop. The bookshelf stood against the wall, 3 shelves planed smooth. The 4th, still rough. I picked up the hand plane and pushed. A thin curl of oak rose from the surface, pale and fragrant, and fell to the floor like a whispered prayer. Tomorrow, they would play the video. Tomorrow, the jury would see Derek's hand and hear Megan's voice. Tomorrow, I would sit 12 feet from my daughter and watch her face when the truth filled the room like sawdust. I planed until the wood was smooth. Then I turned off the light. James Oakley returned to the stand at 9:12 on the second morning. He had not finished. Nathan Price walked him through the remaining 4 transfers, $60,000 in April, $75,000 in June, $85,000 in September, and the final $55,000 in May of 2024. Each time, James placed the forged signature beside Bobby's known signature on the overhead screen. Each time, the jury followed his pointer from one loop to the next. By the 4th comparison, the woman in the back row had stopped taking notes. She was just staring. Price asked James about Palmetto Capital Group, the second shell company. James described it as a pass-through entity, registered in Delaware to the same post office box in Charleston. All 3 properties acquired by Magnolia Ridge were transferred to Palmetto within 60 days of purchase. From Palmetto, the funds moved to Derek Hale's personal brokerage account. James projected the account statement. The balance showed $290,000 in outgoing wire transfers to a commercial real estate investment group in Hilton Head. Derek had used my husband's stolen money to service his own debt. Philip Garner cross-examined James for 40 minutes. He questioned the chain of custody for the bank records, suggested the financial trail could support legitimate estate planning, and asked whether James had personally verified each transfer with the originating bank. James answered every question the same way, with a number, a date, or a document reference. He never raised his voice. He never guessed. When Garner asked if it was possible Bobby had authorized the transfers verbally, James said, "I investigated the documents. The documents say no." Judge Harlow excused James at 11:41. Price called Dr. Patricia Alvarez next. She was a small woman with silver hair and a voice that carried like a tuning fork. She described her methodology: digital overlay analysis combined with ink composition testing and stroke pressure mapping. She had examined 6 questioned signatures and compared them to 14 known exemplars of Bobby's handwriting spanning 1982 through 2023. Her conclusion was that all 6 question signatures were produced by a different hand, with a confidence level of 99.4%. Garner challenged her on the 0.4%. He asked what accounted for the remaining uncertainty. She said, "Age, medication, and fatigue can alter handwriting. I accounted for all 3. The variations in the question's signatures are not consistent with natural deterioration. They are consistent with simulation." The jury wrote that word down. Simulation. After lunch, Price said, "The United States calls its next exhibit." The lights dimmed. A television screen on a rolling cart was positioned so the jury and the gallery could see it. Price pressed play. The video was dated March 22, 2023. It came from the home security camera mounted above the front door of Megan and Derek's house on White Marsh Island. The camera pointed toward the dining room through a wide archway. The image was clear enough to read the label on the coffee mug sitting on the table. Derek sat at the dining table with a stack of documents and a black pen. Megan stood behind him, leaning over his shoulder. Her lips moved first. The audio was faint, but the transcript appeared on a second screen beside the video. She said, "Robert, space, James, space, Bancroft." She spelled her father's name letter by letter, while her husband wrote it on the line marked property owner signature. Derek lifted the pen. Megan picked up the document, held it at arm's length, tilted her head and said, "The B needs to loop more. Do it again." Derek took a fresh form from the stack and wrote the name a second time. Megan nodded. She put the signed document into a manila folder and kissed him on the cheek. The video lasted 2 minutes and 14 seconds. When it ended, the courtroom was silent. I could hear the fluorescent lights humming their low note. I could hear Ruth breathing beside me. I could hear my own heartbeat in my wrists. I looked at Megan. She was staring at the blank screen. Her hands were flat on the table. Her lips were pressed together so tightly they had gone white. Derek sat motionless. Garner was writing something on his legal pad, but his pen had stopped moving halfway through a word. Price said, "The United States now offers Exhibit 14, an audio recording." He pressed play again. Bobby's voice filled the courtroom. It was thinner than I remembered, rougher around the edges. But it was him. He recorded it on May 15, 2024, in his workshop. I recognized the background hum of the dust collector he never turned off. He said, "My name is Robert James Bancroft. I am 70 years old. I live at 34 Abercorn Lane, Savannah, Georgia. I am recording this because my daughter Megan and her husband Derek have stolen $410,000 from me and my wife Eleanor through forged documents and fraudulent property transfers. I discovered the theft in January of 2024. I have spent 6 months gathering evidence." He spoke for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He named every transfer, every property, every forged signature. He described how Derek planned to redirect the $380,000 life insurance payout by changing the beneficiary. He mentioned the backup guardianship filing through Hargrove. His voice cracked once, near the end, when he said, "Megan is my only child. I built her first crib with my own hands. I do not understand how we got here." A juror in the front row removed her glasses and pressed her fingers against her eyes. The man beside her stared at the ceiling. I did not cry. I had already heard this recording in the workshop, alone, with sawdust on my shoes and Bobby's flannel shirt in my lap. But hearing it in this room, with 12 strangers and a judge and my daughter 12 feet away, was different. It was heavier. It pressed against my chest like a planed board laid flat. Price said, "The prosecution rests for today, Your Honor." Judge Harlow adjourned at 3:51. Tomorrow, the defense would present its case. Ruth drove me home again. I sat in the passenger seat watching Savannah pass through the window, the squares, the oaks, the old houses with their iron gates. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but nothing felt the same. In the workshop, I stood in front of the bookshelf. 3 shelves smooth. The 4th, nearly finished. I picked up Bobby's red pencil from the workbench and wrote on the inside of the frame where no one would ever see it. I wrote his initials, RJB, and mine, EMB, and the year, 2025. Then I set the pencil down and closed the door. The prosecution had rested. Bobby had said everything he needed to say. Now it was the defense's turn. And I already knew what they would argue. They would say Bobby was confused, medicated, manipulated by his attorney. They would say the video was taken out of context. They would say I was a grieving widow who wanted someone to blame. Let them talk. The evidence was in the room now, and it would not leave. The defense began on the morning of February 6th. Philip Garner called 3 witnesses. The first was a financial planner named Stephen Kirsch from Hilton Head, who testified that shell companies like Magnolia Ridge and Palmetto Capital were common tools in estate planning for families with multiple properties. He spoke for 22 minutes and used the phrase standard practice 11 times. Nathan Price cross-examined him in 6 minutes. He asked one question. Mr. Kirsch, in your 20 years of practice, how many of your clients forged a family member's signature on a transfer document? Kirsch said, None. Price said, No further questions. The second witness was a handwriting consultant named David Fenn, who disputed Dr. Alvarez's methodology. He argued that digital overlay analysis was less reliable than traditional side-by-side comparison, and that Bobby's handwriting could have changed due to medication for his illness. Price asked Fenn if he had reviewed Bobby's medical records. Fenn said he had not. Price asked if he knew what medication Bobby was taking. Fenn said he did not. Price placed Bobby's known signatures from 2022 and 2023 side by side on the screen. They were nearly identical. He asked Fenn to point to any evidence of medication-related deterioration. Fenn studied the screen for 9 seconds and said, I would need more time. Judge Harlow noted for the record that the witness had been provided all exhibits 4 weeks prior to trial. The third witness was Megan. She walked to the stand in the same cream blouse and pearl earrings. She placed her right hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Garner led her through a series of questions about her relationship with her father. She described Sunday dinners, birthday celebrations, a trip to Charleston when she was 12. She said Bobby had talked about transferring the properties for years. She said he wanted to simplify the estate for Ellie's sake. She said, My father trusted Derek. He treated him like a son. Price stood for cross-examination. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, Mrs. Hale, on March 22, 2023, were you present in your dining room when your husband signed a property transfer document? Megan said, I don't recall the specific date. Price played the video again. The courtroom watched Derek write the name, while Megan spelled each letter. When it ended, Price said, Does that help you recall? Megan looked at Garner. Garner did not move. She said, I was helping him practice my father's signature because my father asked us to sign on his behalf. He was too tired. Price said, Your father asked your husband to forge his signature. Megan said, It was not forging. It was signing on his behalf. Price said, Did your father provide written authorization for anyone to sign on his behalf? Megan said, It was verbal. Price said, Your father, a carpenter, who documented every measurement, every cut, every joint in a notebook for 38 years, gave verbal authorization for a $410,000 property transfer and wrote nothing down. Megan did not answer. Price repeated the question. She said, Yes. Price asked about the life insurance. He asked about the guardianship filing through Hargrove. He asked about the $290,000 Derek wired to the Hilton Head Investment Group. Megan answered each question the same way. She said she did not know, or she said Derek handled the finances, or she said her father had approved everything verbally. Each answer sounded thinner than the one before, like wood shaved too many times. Garner delivered his closing argument in 28 minutes. He emphasized reasonable doubt, questioned the chain of evidence, and painted Bobby as a sick man, influenced by outside advisors. Price's closing was shorter, 19 minutes. He replayed 12 seconds of the video. The moment Megan said the bee needs to loop more. Do it again. He let the silence after those words fill the room. Then he said, this was not estate planning. This was theft. Planned, rehearsed, and repeated over 14 months. Judge Harlow sent the jury to deliberate at 1:47 in the afternoon. I sat in the hallway on a wooden bench that reminded me of a church pew. Ruth sat beside me. Pastor Crawford had gone to get sandwiches from a deli on Broughton Street. Victoria Chen said deliberation could last hours or days. She said the video was the strongest piece of evidence she had seen in 11 years of practice. The jury returned at 6:52. 5 hours and 5 minutes. Judge Harlow read the verdicts. Derek Allen Hale, guilty on all 10 counts. Wire fraud, 4 counts guilty. Bank fraud, 3 counts guilty. Identity theft, 2 counts guilty. Conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation, guilty. Megan Eloise Hale, guilty on 8 of 10 counts. Guilty on 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of bank fraud, 2 counts of identity theft, and the conspiracy charge. Not guilty on 1 count, each of wire fraud and bank fraud, where her direct involvement could not be proven beyond reasonable doubt. Derek did not move. Megan lowered her head until her forehead touched the table. The pearl earrings swung forward and caught the light. Judge Harlow scheduled sentencing for March 7th. She asked if the victim wished to make a statement. Victoria nodded at me. I stood. My legs were steadier than they had been that first morning. I walked to the podium between the 2 tables. I did not bring notes. I spoke for 3 minutes. I said Bobby Bancroft built things his whole life. I said he built our house, our furniture, our daughter's crib, and a bookshelf he never finished. I said he also built a case, piece by piece, from his workshop, while cancer moved through his body, because he loved me enough to protect what we had earned together. I said the money could be recovered, but trust could not. I said I did not come to this courtroom for revenge. I came because Bobby asked me to finish what he started. I looked at Megan. She was still bent over the table. I said, I am your mother. That will never change. But you lied to me in the kitchen of the house your father built, and you spelled his name while someone else wrote it. I will carry that for the rest of my life. I hope you carry it too. I returned to my seat. Ruth took my hand. Her grip was firm and warm, and she did not let go until we reached the parking garage. That night I sat in Bobby's chair in the workshop. The bookshelf was almost done. 4 shelves planed. The frame joined. Only the finish remained. 3 coats of tung oil Bobby had bought and labeled with the date. I opened the first can. The oil smelled like walnuts and rain. I dipped the brush and began the first coat. The wood darkened as the oil soaked in, revealing grain patterns that had been invisible on the dry surface. Lines and curves and knots that told the story of the tree. Where it had grown, where it had been wounded, where it had healed. Bobby always said wood remembers everything. I was beginning to understand what he meant. On March 7th, I returned to the federal courthouse for the last time. The drive felt shorter than it had a month earlier. I parked Bobby's truck in the same garage on Drayton Street and paid the same attendant. He recognized me and said, "Good luck today, ma'am." I thanked him and meant it. The courtroom was fuller than it had been during the trial. A reporter from the Savannah Morning News sat in the back row with a notebook. 2 women from the Senior Citizens Legal Aid Office sat behind her. Ruth was already in the second row. Same navy dress, same uncomfortable shoes. Pastor Crawford sat on her other side, with his Bible resting on his knee. He was not reading it. He was just holding it the way Bobby used to hold a piece of wood before he decided where to cut. Judge Harlow entered at 9:15. She asked Derek to stand. He rose slowly. His attorney Philip Garner stood beside him. Harlow read the sentence. For the 4 counts of wire fraud, 48 months each, to run concurrently. For the 3 counts of bank fraud, 36 months each, concurrent. For the 2 counts of identity theft, 24 months each, concurrent. For conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation, 60 months. Total effective sentence, 60 months in federal custody, 5 years. Restitution of $410,000 to the estate of Robert James Bancroft. Forfeiture of all interest in Magnolia Ridge Properties and Palmetto Capital Group. 3 years of supervised release following imprisonment. Derek said, "Yes, Your Honor," when asked if he understood. His voice sounded like a man reading a grocery list. Judge Harlow asked Megan to stand. Megan rose. She was wearing a gray dress I did not recognize. No pearl earrings this time. Harlow read her sentence. For 3 counts of wire fraud, 36 months each, concurrent. For 2 counts of bank fraud, 24 months each, concurrent. For 2 counts of identity theft, 18 months each, concurrent. For conspiracy, 42 months. Total effective sentence, 42 months, 3.5 years. Same restitution order, 2 years of supervised release. Megan's attorney requested a moment. Megan turned and looked at me for the first time since the verdict. Her eyes were dry, but her chin was trembling. She opened her mouth and closed it. Then she said, "I'm sorry, Mom." 2 words and a name. They crossed the 12 feet between us and landed somewhere in my chest where I could not reach them. I nodded. I did not speak. There was nothing left to say in this room. United States Marshals escorted Derek and Megan through a side door. Derek walked without looking back. Megan paused at the threshold and turned her head. I raised my hand. Not a wave. Just a hand held open. The way you hold a door for someone you are not sure will walk through it. Then she was gone. Victoria Chen met me in the hallway. She said the restitution process would take 6 to 9 months. The 3 properties would revert to the Bancroft estate. Bobby's life insurance policy would be restored to its original beneficiary structure. She estimated the total recovered value at approximately $435,000, including accrued rental income the court had frozen. She shook my hand and said, "Bobby built a very strong case." I said, "Bobby built everything strong." Outside the courthouse, the March air was warm for the first time since autumn. Azaleas were beginning to bloom in the squares. Ruth walked me to the truck and said, "What are you going to do now?" I said, "I am going to finish the bookshelf." That afternoon, I opened the second can of tung oil. Bobby had written the date on the lid in red pencil, August 12th, 2024. 6 weeks before he died. He had bought 3 cans, 1 for each coat, and labeled them first, second, third in his careful block letters. I had applied the first coat the night of the verdict. Now I dipped the brush into the second can and began. The oil went on darker this time. The grain deepened. Patterns I had seen during the first coat became more defined, as if the wood were slowly deciding to tell its whole story. I worked in long strokes the way Bobby had taught me to sand. Always with the grain. Never against it. The brush was an old one. Bristles softened by years of use. And it fit my hand the way his tools were beginning to fit my hand. Not perfectly, but close enough. I thought about Megan in a processing center somewhere, changing into federal clothing, answering questions from an intake officer. I thought about the pearl earrings sitting in a plastic bag with her other personal items. Bobby's mother had worn those earrings on her wedding day in 1951. They had passed through 3 generations of Bancroft women, and now they were in a government envelope. I finished the second coat and set the brush in a jar of mineral spirits. The bookshelf was beautiful. 4 shelves, each one planed and oiled, glowing amber in the workshop light. The frame was solid white oak, joined with mortise and tenon, no screws, no nails, just wood holding wood the way Bobby believed things should be held together. On the inside of the frame, hidden where no one would see unless they moved the shelf away from the wall, were our initials, RJB and EMB, and the year, a signature no one would ever need to forge. I turned off the workshop light and walked across the yard to the house. The kitchen was quiet. The magnolia tree Bobby planted the year Megan was born was covered in white buds, each one tight and closed, waiting for a warmer day. I made a cup of tea and sat at the table where Bobby used to spread his blueprints. The table was empty now, except for the tea and my hands. And the silence was not heavy anymore. It was just silence. The kind that comes after a long conversation has finally reached its end. Ruth called at 8. She asked how I was. I said, I applied the second coat. She said, 1 more to go. I said, 1 more to go. I washed the teacup, dried it, and placed it in the cabinet beside Bobby's mug. The one with the chipped handle he refused to throw away. Then I went to bed and slept without dreaming for the first time in 5 months. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I drove to the Savannah Senior Citizens Center on Bull Street. The building was a converted Victorian house with a wide porch and a ramp that someone had built with pressure-treated lumber and lag bolts. Bobby would have noticed the bolts were too long. I noticed them too, which meant something was changing in me. Victoria Chen had mentioned the center during our last meeting. She said they needed volunteers for their financial literacy program, specifically someone who could sit with elderly residents and help them read bank statements, insurance documents, and property contracts. She said, "You have more experience with these documents than most attorneys I know." I told her I had that experience because someone tried to steal everything I owned. She said, "That is exactly why you should go." The director was a woman named Carolyn Mead, 53, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a desk covered in manila folders. She shook my hand and said she had read about the case in the Savannah Morning News. She did not ask questions about Megan. She asked what days I was available. I said Tuesdays and Thursdays. She said, "We will start you with Margaret." Margaret Hollis was 81 years old. She lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on Habersham Street and received Social Security and a small pension from the Chatham County School District, where she had taught 4th grade for 31 years. Her nephew had been managing her finances for 2 years, and she had noticed that her savings account balance was lower than it should have been. She could not explain the discrepancy because the statements confused her. The numbers were too small, and the language was too dense. I sat beside her at a folding table in the center's common room, and we went through 3 months of statements together. I brought a magnifying glass and a yellow highlighter. I showed her how to match each withdrawal to a check number or a debit card transaction. We found 4 withdrawals she did not recognize, totaling $2,300. They were debit card purchases at electronics stores in Jacksonville, a city Margaret had not visited in 6 years. She looked at the highlighted lines and said, "That is Curtis, her nephew." She said it the way you name a bird you have been hearing outside your window for months without knowing what it was. Not surprised, just finally certain. I helped her file a report with Savannah First Bank. Brenda Holloway, who still worked in the fraud department, processed the claim. I did not tell Margaret how I knew Brenda. Some connections are better left unexplained. By the end of March, I was meeting with 3 clients a week. Carolyn paired me with residents who had questions about reverse mortgages, life insurance beneficiary changes, and power of attorney documents. Every document reminded me of something. The reverse mortgage reminded me of the quitclaim deed Megan had placed on my kitchen table. The power of attorney forms reminded me of the forged signatures. The life insurance paperwork reminded me of Derek's plan to redirect Bobby's $380,000 policy. But the reminders did not paralyze me anymore. They sharpened me. Each time I recognized a red flag in someone else's paperwork, I felt Bobby's hand on my shoulder, guiding the pencil the way he guided the plane across rough wood. One Thursday in early April, I met a man named Harold Price. No relation to the prosecutor. Harold was 77 and had received a letter from a company in Delaware offering to buy his house on East Gwinnett Street for $120,000, roughly 60% of its market value. The letter was printed on heavy stock, with an embossed logo and a toll-free number. It looked legitimate. Harold had already signed the first page. I read the letter twice. The company was called Coastal Heritage Acquisitions. The address was a post office box in Wilmington. The purchase agreement contained a clause on page 4, printed in 8-point type, that transferred not only the house but all mineral and water rights, all future development rights, and Harold's interest in any adjacent parcels he might inherit. I circled the clause with Bobby's red pencil, which I now carried in my purse the way other women carry lipstick. I said, "Harold, do not sign anything else." He looked at me, the way I must have looked at Ruth the night she handed me the brass key, confused and relieved at the same time. I called Victoria Chen. She reviewed the letter and confirmed it was a predatory acquisition scheme targeting elderly homeowners in historic districts. She filed a complaint with the Georgia Attorney General's office and referred Harold to a pro bono real estate attorney. Harold's house stayed his. That evening, I sat in Bobby's workshop. The bookshelf stood against the wall with 2 coats of tung oil glowing under the light. The third can sat on the workbench, labeled in Bobby's block letters. Third. I had not opened it yet. I was waiting, though I could not explain for what. I looked at the workbench and noticed something I had missed for months. Bobby's red pencil had made a small mark on the bench surface near the vise. It was not a measurement or a note. It was a tiny heart, no bigger than a thumbprint, drawn in the corner where his left hand rested while he worked. He must have drawn it without thinking, the way you doodle during a phone call, except Bobby never doodled. Everything he made was deliberate. I traced the heart with my fingertip. The graphite was smooth and faint. I wondered when he had drawn it, before the diagnosis or after, before he found the fraud or after. It did not matter. He had drawn it at this bench, in this shop, in the life we built together, and it had been waiting for me to find it, the way everything else had been waiting. Ruth called at 7:30. She asked what I did today. I said, "I helped a man keep his house." She said, "Bobby would like that." I said, "Bobby would have checked the lag bolts on the ramp." Ruth laughed. It was the first time I had made anyone laugh since September. I closed the workshop door and walked across the yard. The magnolia tree was in full bloom now. White petals open wide against the dark leaves. The air smelled like the tree and the river and the old wood of the house. I stood under the branches for a moment and let the evening settle around me. Tomorrow was Friday. I would go to the center again on Tuesday. Margaret's nephew had been confronted, and the missing money was being returned. Harold's house was safe. 3 small repairs in a world full of broken things. I went inside and made tea. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in the middle of April. I found it in the mailbox between a water bill and a flyer for a lawn service I did not need. The envelope was white, standard federal issue, with a return address printed in block letters. Federal Prison Camp, Jessup, Georgia. Inmate name, Megan E. Hale. Registration number 08743-029. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. I made tea. I drank the tea. I washed the cup. I dried the cup and placed it in the cabinet beside Bobby's mug with the chipped handle. Then I sat down and looked at the envelope for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because the kitchen clock ticked loud enough to count. Bobby would have opened it immediately. He never let a thing sit unfinished. If a board needed sanding, he sanded it. If a joint needed glue, he glued it. He did not wait for the right moment, because he believed every moment was the right moment if you were willing to use it. I was not Bobby. I waited. But 11 minutes was long enough. The letter was 2 pages. Handwritten in blue ink on lined paper. Megan's handwriting had not changed since high school. Small, neat, slightly slanted to the right, the way left-handed people sometimes write when they have been taught by right-handed teachers. I had watched that handwriting develop from crayon scrawls on construction paper to cursive exercises in third grade to college application essays I proofread at this same table. She began with "Dear Mom," not "Dear Mother," which she had used during the trial when speaking to Garner. Not "Ellie," which she had used during the confrontation in the kitchen. "Dear Mom." The words sat on the page like a stone placed carefully at the base of something that might be rebuilt. She wrote that she was adjusting. The facility was minimum security. She shared a room with 3 other women. She worked in the library, which she said I would appreciate, and she had read 9 books in 5 weeks. She listed them: 4 novels, 2 memoirs, a history of Savannah she found on the donation shelf, and 2 self-help books her counselor recommended. She said the Savannah history book mentioned Abercorn Lane, and she had stared at the page for a long time. She wrote about Derek. She said they had filed for divorce. His attorney had sent the papers, and she had signed them in the presence of a prison counselor. She said the marriage had been wrong for years and that the fraud had started as Derek's idea, but she had not stopped it. She wrote, "I told myself it was estate planning. I told myself Dad would not mind. I told myself a lot of things, and I believed all of them because believing was easier than looking." She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not ask me to visit. She asked one question. She asked if the magnolia tree was blooming. I set the letter on the table and looked out the kitchen window. The magnolia was in full bloom, white petals so wide and heavy they bent the branches. Bobby had planted that tree the week Megan was born. A live root ball sapling he carried home in the bed of his truck from a nursery on Skidaway Road. He watered it every evening that first summer, standing in the yard with a garden hose, talking to the tree the way he talked to wood in his workshop, quietly, as if it could hear him. I picked up a pen and a sheet of paper from the drawer beside the refrigerator. I wrote, "Dear Megan." I told her the magnolia was blooming. I told her the petals were white and the branches were heavy. I told her I was volunteering at the Senior Citizen Center on Bull Street and that I was helping people read their bank statements. I told her about Margaret Hollis and the 4 unauthorized withdrawals. I did not tell her about Harold Price and the predatory acquisition letter because the parallel was too sharp and I was not ready to draw it. I wrote that Ruth was well and still wore the uncomfortable navy shoes to every important occasion. I wrote that Pastor Crawford had started a new sermon series about rebuilding and that the congregation had grown by 14 members since January. I wrote that the workshop was clean and that I had learned to use the hand plane, the block plane, and the card scraper. I did not write about the bookshelf. Not yet. I signed the letter Mom and sealed it in an envelope. I addressed it to the federal prison camp in Jessup, Georgia. Inmate Megan E. Hale, registration number 08743-029. I put a stamp on it and set it by the front door. That afternoon I went to the workshop. The bookshelf stood against the wall, 2 coats of tung oil shining in the light from the single window. The third can sat on the workbench where I had left it weeks ago. Bobby's block letters on the lid. Third. I opened the can. The oil was darker than the first 2, richer, almost the color of honey left in the sun. I dipped the brush and began the final coat. The bristles moved along the grain, slow and even. And the wood responded, the way wood always responds to care. It opened up. The grain deepened to a color I had never seen in raw oak. Something between amber and copper. Warm and alive. I coated all 4 shelves, the sides, the top, the back panel. I turned the bookshelf around and coated the hidden side, where our initials were carved. R. J. B. E. M. B. 2025. The oil darkened the letters and made them look as though they had always been part of the wood. I set the brush down and stepped back. The bookshelf was finished. 4 shelves, a solid frame, mortise and tenon joints, 3 coats of tung oil. Bobby had started it, I had finished it. Neither of us could have built it alone. I carried it into the house. It was heavier than I expected, and I had to stop twice in the hallway to rest. I placed it in the living room, against the wall between the fireplace and the window where Bobby had always said a bookshelf should go. I had not understood why until now. The morning light would fall across the shelves and touch the spines of whatever books I chose to place there. I stood in the living room and looked at the empty shelves. They were waiting. I went to the hallway closet, where I kept the boxes of books I had packed when we moved the furniture during Bobby's illness. I opened the first box. On top was a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that Bobby had given me on our 3rd anniversary. Inside the cover he had written, "For Ellie, who reads the world the way I read would. With grain, never against it." I placed it on the first shelf. It fit perfectly. On the first Saturday of May, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet, the way it had been quiet every morning since September. But the silence had changed. It no longer pressed against the walls. It rested in them, the way warmth rests in wood that has been standing in the sun. I made coffee in the kitchen. Bobby's mug with the chipped handle sat in the cabinet beside mine. I used my own mug, the blue one with the faded library logo from Chatham County, and I carried it to the living room, where the bookshelf stood between the fireplace and the window. Morning light fell across the shelves the way Bobby had predicted it would. He had measured the angle of the window and the height of the wall before he chose that spot. He measured everything. I used to think it was excessive. Now I understood it was love expressed in fractions of an inch. The shelves were filling. I had unpacked 4 boxes of books over the past 2 weeks. To Kill a Mockingbird stood on the first shelf beside East of Eden and a worn copy of The Yearling that had belonged to Bobby's mother. The second shelf held my library science textbooks from the University of Georgia, spines cracked and pages soft from 30 years of handling. The third shelf held Bobby's carpentry references, a dog-eared copy of The Complete Manual of Woodworking, and 3 notebooks filled with measurements, sketches, and the occasional red pencil note in the margins. The fourth shelf I left empty. I did not know what would go there yet. Some things need time to reveal themselves. At 8, I drove to the Senior Citizen Center. Carolyn Mead had asked me to speak at their monthly Saturday breakfast, a gathering of about 40 residents and volunteers in the common room. She wanted me to talk about financial safety. I told her I was not a speaker. She said, "You are a woman who caught a $410,000 fraud from a workbench in Savannah. You are exactly a speaker." I stood at the front of the room with Bobby's red pencil in my hand. I did not use a podium or a microphone. I told them my name was Eleanor Bancroft, and that my husband Bobby was a carpenter who built things to last. I told them he also built a case against our own daughter and her husband because they stole from us, and he did it while dying of cancer because he believed broken things should be repaired, not ignored. I told them to read every document before signing. I told them to ask questions when the numbers did not match. I told them that the words irrevocable and standard practice and just sign here were the 3 most dangerous phrases in the English language. I told them about the red pencil and how Bobby circled every number that did not belong. I spoke for 12 minutes. When I finished, a woman in the second row raised her hand and said her grandson had asked her to co-sign a loan last month. She had not read the terms. I said, "Bring the papers on Tuesday. We will read them together." She nodded, and something shifted in her face. The same expression I had seen on Margaret Hollis and Harold Price. The look of a person who realizes they do not have to understand everything alone. After the breakfast, Ruth drove me to Bonaventure Cemetery. We had not visited Bobby's grave since the sentencing. The cemetery was green and still. Live oaks draped with Spanish moss, the headstones pale against the dark grass. Bobby's marker was simple gray granite. Robert James Bancroft, 1954 to 2024. Beloved husband, father, builder. I placed a single white magnolia blossom on the stone. Ruth stood beside me with her hands clasped. She said, "Do you talk to him?" I said, "Not out loud." She said, That counts. We stood there for a while. A mockingbird sang from the oak above us, cycling through 4 different songs as if it could not decide which one fit the morning. Bobby would have listened, and then gone back to work. He was never sentimental about stillness. He believed you honored the dead by building something for the living. On the drive home, Ruth asked about Megan. I told her about the letter and my reply. Ruth said, "Will you visit her?" I said, "Not yet, but I will write again." Ruth said, "That is enough for now." She was right. Some repairs take 1 coat of oil, others take 3. And some take years of slow, patient work before the grain shows through. That evening I sat in the workshop for the last time as a student. I had learned the hand plane, the block plane, the card scraper, the marking gauge, and the dovetail saw. I could sharpen a chisel on the whetstone and check a board for square with a combination square. I was not a carpenter. I would never be Bobby, but I could read wood now the way I once read books. With attention, with patience, with respect for what the material was trying to say. I opened Bobby's 3rd notebook, the one I had not finished reading. On the last page, beneath a sketch of the bookshelf with all 4 shelves drawn in proportion, he had written a note in red pencil. It said, "Ellie, if you are reading this, you finished it. I knew you would. The wood was always in you. You just needed a reason to pick up the plane. I love you. I loved you from the first morning you walked into the hardware store on Broughton Street and asked for a book on furniture repair. I did not have the book, but I had the answer. And I have been building things for you ever since. Bobby." I closed the notebook. I sat in his chair. The workshop smelled like tung oil and oak dust, and the faint ghost of the coffee he used to drink at this bench every morning at 5. The tools hung on the pegboard in the order he had arranged them, largest to smallest, left to right, each outline traced in pencil so you always knew where everything belonged. I looked at the empty workbench. It was clean. The sawdust had been swept. The vise was closed. The red pencil lay in the groove beside the ruler. The tiny heart he had drawn was still there in the corner, faint and deliberate. I picked up the pencil. I drew a second heart beside his. The same size, the same shape. Mine was less steady. The lines were not as clean, but it was there. Next to his, on the bench he built, in the shop he made, in the life we shared for 41 years. Then I turned off the light and walked across the yard to the house. The magnolia tree stood in the darkness, its white blossoms glowing faintly against the night sky. The porch light was on. The kitchen window was warm. The bookshelf waited in the living room with 3 shelves full and 1 shelf empty. I went inside. I locked the door. I placed Bobby's red pencil on the 4th shelf, standing upright, leaning against the back panel. It fit there, a small thing in an empty space, waiting for whatever comes next. Broken things can be rebuilt. Bobby taught me that. And the rebuilding, it turns out, is where the living happens.